Thank you. Didn't realize there'd be so much energy out here tonight. Let me first give you a spoiler warning, as we'll immediately hit spoiler territory here. That out of the way, let me say, there's a significant layer missing from the discussion of Silent Hill F. The game is not exactly subtle about its messaging of gender discrimination. In fact, a lot of people think that this is the extent of the game's thematic elements. But if you think about it, that doesn't quite make sense. If the game is only about sexism, then why is Hinako herself the main antagonist? Why does Hinako struggle against women as much as she does with men? And most importantly, why would the game suddenly bring in ancient deities as a major point of the third act? The game is much larger than the single concept of feminism, and has more to say than just sexism is bad. It focuses on themes of tradition, community, and self-determination. The game details how our role in life is defined by everyone around us, but also how our reactions to this are really what become our undoing. And yes, I do mean we. While the role of gender is a bit heavy-handed in the game, the themes of this game are just as applicable to men and women. And this discussion is something I hope to direct, as I've seen people who also see the same points as me, but I haven't seen anyone connecting the dots all together in one spot. Part of this is because of the cultural barrier. There's actually a ton of cultural meaning and symbolism that gets lost in translation. For example, did you know that the name Hinako has an intentional double meaning, or that the game's release marked the start of the Higanbana blooming season, and the flowers, which only bloom for 2 weeks, symbolize a journey into the afterlife? That's the sort of thing that this video is going to get into. Not so much the what happens, but the meaning and symbolism of why things happen, especially Japanese cultural points that we on the English-speaking internet may be less familiar with. Silent Hill F marked a huge departure point for the series, moving from the foggy American Northeast to the remote Japanese mountain countryside. When the game was first announced, I figured I'd do a quick video going over the Japanese cultural points, a little info on the flowers, some talk about the foxes, and hey, this guy's kinda spooky, isn't he? Then I'd be done with it, simple as that. Well, call me a Silent Hill F for fool, because of course it wasn't going to be that simple. Setting the series back home let the team tell a story that addresses fear at a subconscious level that doesn't perfectly translate in the West. The deeper messaging of this game is so deeply intertwined with Japanese history and traditional culture that it's impossible to explain one thing without it touching on 2 more. The complexity isn't surprising, as Konami brought on established scenario writer Ryukishio7 to present a nuanced and multi-layered story that mirrors real-world anxiety. This message is getting delivered through the perspective of Hinako Shimizu, as we see her battle not only grotesque monsters, but the infinitely more terrifying reality of the rigid and coercive expectations of 1960s Japanese society. After all, as French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre said, hell is other people. Let me start with one of the points that I'm surprised isn't discussed more. Who in the world is Ryukishio7, and why are they credited front and center? You may recognize the pen name Ryukishio7 as the mastermind behind the complex horror saga Higurashi When They Cry. In this series, he told a layered, intricate story about a remote mountain town that started simple, but quickly spiraled into something larger. While that already sounds spot on for Silent Hill F, there's one more thing. Ryukishio7 spent about 10 years working as a civil servant, a background widely believed to involve social welfare work. This is because of the accuracy of his depictions of Japan's child protection systems. Ryukishi also stated in interviews that he wanted to avoid common tropes of women in horror, specifically taking issue with stories where the female lead was treated as a punching bag, saying that he wanted to create a female main character with agency. There's a direct through line here to the issues that the game chooses to tackle in Silent Hill F. A direct critique of systemic cruelty centering on Hinako's agency in a world that wants to put her in a box, somehow both figuratively and literally. What's clear is that Ryukishi specifically wanted the story to get deeper over time. He called the story a salad dressing of horror to explain how the mechanics of the plot work. He explained that just like when you shake a vinaigrette, at first all of the themes and events are blended together, but as time passes, you see the elements start to separate and become clearer. This deliberate design dictates the entire game structure. The first ending you get isn't the whole truth, but if you play through the game again, even minor cutscenes change on your way to see completely new endings. Like oil and vinegar, the psychological and supernatural elements only begin to separate across these multiple playthroughs in order to see the full picture. This intentional blending of reality works because we're not seeing a straightforward sequence of events. It's clear that our protagonist, Hinako Shimizu, knows more than we do. She reacts with fear and emotion, sure, but she never quite seems surprised. This is an effective tool for letting us know there's more than meets the eye. Let's take a look at the setting of the story, which gives us our first clues about the core mystery in Silent Hill F. Ebisugaoka is a strange place. It's a town that constantly seems to be of two minds. It's trapped between pre-war tradition and post-war modernization, trapped between a reputation of prosperity for some and the misfortune of others. Heck, even the kanji for its name has two readings. The kanji for Ebisu classically meant warrior, but in folk spiritualism references a fisherman god of fortune. And just like her hometown, a local high school student finds herself trapped between two identities. Our main character, Hinako Shimizu, struggles to reconcile her identity as a young woman with the suffocating expectations of everyone around her. We see this during the opening events. We see the friction not just between her and her parents, but also from both of her female friends and even her childhood best friend / boy next door love interest. Although we won't have the tools to understand this until much later, it turns out that we're seeing the fallout of a specific event. Hinako was promised off in an arranged marriage to absolve her father's debt. That context helps the opening scene make a bit more sense. Hinako is frustrated with both of her parents, her father for his abusive and selfish behavior, and her mother for her passive participation in a system that suppresses and controls women. Her friend Sakuko resents her for marrying someone and leaving their small town behind, while her childhood best friend Shu struggles between voicing his long-held feelings of love and supporting her as a friend. And then there's Rinko, whose barely concealed absolute seething hatred for Hinako comes from Rinko's own feelings for Shu and her jealousy of the relationship between the two. This is a scientifically improbable amount of expectations for a single person to struggle with. The game starts quickly. As soon as we meet the last of the main cast, a thick blanket of fog rolls into town, and Ebisugaoka is overwhelmed with a spreading corruption. Leading the corruption is a faceless fog monster who relentlessly hunts Hinako down. Desperate to escape the monsters in the mist, the story follows Hinako as she tries to make her way out of town with her friends. Throughout the story, anytime Hinako falls asleep or is knocked unconscious, we follow a symbolic version of Hinako, navigating her way through the world of the Dark Shrine. The Dark Shrine is a mysterious dream world that seems to be a reflection of Hinako's inner thoughts. In this world, she is guided by a man in a fox mask, who we'll call Fox Mask, that we later learn is her future husband, a man named Kotoyuki. As he leads her deeper into the dream world, his requests get darker and more disturbing. Hinako is first asked to sacrifice her friends and then to sacrifice parts of her own body. After our shock wears off, it becomes clear to the audience that the fox mask is symbolically preparing Hinako for their wedding. Hinako in the real world desperately tries to regroup with her friends, contradicting her Dark Shrine actions. Back in the Dark Shrine, upon completing the final ritual, Dream World Hinako turns into the fog monster. It turns out that throughout the game we've seen two separate versions of Hinako battle against each other, with one side representing her desire to maintain her independence, and the other side representing the part of Hinako willing to move on in life. And let me pause here to briefly emphasize this distinction, because this is a critical thematic element we'll see echoed throughout the game again and again. The battle between keeping things the same at the risk of stunting your growth versus radically changing yourself at the cost of compromising your personal values. Okay, back to the story. The game we play is Hinako's hallucinatory break, a fragmented and traumatic journey through her own psyche. We follow Hinako's journey to confront expectations that will require her to give up her own autonomy. Hinako is surrounded by people who refuse to see her beyond an object to be sold, a security blanket, a rival, or a doll to be dressed up and owned. Not counting the joke ending, there are 4 endings to the game. The first ending is mandatory and shows a confused Hinako committing a wedding day murder spree, confusing nightmare and reality. If you start a new game after this and avoid taking even a single red pill, you'll have the option between achieving the second and third endings. These endings are 2 sides of a coin that show Hinako coming to a decision about the marriage. You'll be able to see what happens if Hinako goes through with the marriage or pulls out after all. And finally, if you play through the game a 3rd time, you'll be able to experience the 4th and true ending. In this ending, Hinako manages to find balance between the 2 sides of her mind. Although the 4th ending is seen as the true and happy ending, it's important to note that the game wants us to see this only through repeated playthroughs of the story. This is important because, to quote Gerald from Hey Arnold, the journey is the destination. The game wants us to go through this ordeal and run into the bad endings, because this game wants to ask the question, why are things like this? Why does Hinako have to silence a part of herself in order to make a decision either way? The game makes a specific point to demonstrate that the framework around Hinako's struggle is inherently flawed. That context is built on the foundation of something called the IE system, something you won't even know exists if you don't play the game in Japanese. The IE system is, or was, a rigidly defined social system that governed Japanese society for centuries, meaning house or family system. The concept prioritized the continuation, honor, and property of the collective house over the needs of any individual member. It may come as no surprise to learn that it was a strictly patriarchal social structure. Eldest sons were expected to take on the family leadership position, owning family land, running the family business, and taking care of their parents in the family home. For women, their worth was determined almost entirely by their role in producing male children, sacrificing their identity upon marriage. In fact, wives were expected to prioritize their new family of in-laws over their blood-related family. In the English translation of the game, we get a small mention of Hinako's father as a traditional man, but without this context, it just sounds like maybe he expected his wife to cook and clean. The localization team knocked this game out of the park, but there really was no way to acknowledge the full meaning of what the IE system entails. By the time the game takes place, the IE system technically should have been dead. The system was banned after World War II, but it didn't just immediately vanish. Post-war Japan saw rapid recovery, but this also meant that modernization was slow to reach rural areas. In isolated mountain towns like Ebisugaoka, outdated traditions were still alive. This was despite the fact that 1960s Japan saw the advent of second-wave feminism. This was an era of feminism specifically focused on questioning strict gender roles, women's roles as housewives, and prioritizing self-determination. As we continue to discuss Hinako Shimizu, you'll see that these points have a one-for-one representation in Hinako's values. Hinako is born late enough to appreciate the freedom she could have in society, but early enough to see it snatched away from her when her father sets up an omiai, or arranged marriage, to settle the family's debt. As Hinako refuses to ignore her own desires to satisfy everyone around her, the game shows her reality spiraling out of control. And let me be clear here, as I'll get into later in the video, this is not a purely male versus female issue. Although gender is clearly a theme here, we'll see how the system victimizes all of its forced participants. So, by the end of this video, I'll make it clear why this messaging was intentional to show systemic violence present in historical Japanese society. Even as a child, Hinako hated the idea that her gender decided what she was allowed to do. This is set up in the first scene of the game, where Hinako complains to her doll that the girls rejected her because she had been playing with the boys. This is a key point to Hinako's character. It's not that she's only interested in playing with the boys. She does enjoy girly things, but she also wants to play spinning tops with the boys. To her, the idea that one's actions need to be limited by gender itself is the problem. And to Hinako, nothing will limit her due to her gender as much as marriage will. Now, marriage can be a scary step for anyone, but for Hinako, it threatens to destroy the independence she values so highly. Not only is her ultimate fate in life assigned to her because of her gender, but under the EA system, it will force her into the subservient and powerless role of a housewife. At least, that's how Hinako sees it. From her eyes, she's seen her mother spending a lifetime serving a man with no value. Make no mistake, while Hinako thinks of her dad as a disgusting, self-absorbed, abusive waste of space, her mother is not spared from her hatred. After all, if her father is such a terrible person, then what kind of a life is it to serve that person every day? Hinako mentions that even if she was free to choose a partner, she would be terrified that any man could turn into a husband that acts like her father. In fact, we can learn a lot about Hinako's thoughts on gender relations by taking a look at the enemies in the game. The first enemy of the game, and by far most common, is the kashimashi, meaning noisy or clamorous. The interesting thing about this name is the Japanese character, which is made up of the character for woman 3 times over. This character relates to the Japanese saying, "When 3 women gather, it gets noisy," which is more than just a little derisive, and ironic considering that they're actually the only quiet enemy in the game. But the telling line here is from her journal where she writes, "I wonder if it wants to hurt me the same way it was hurt," suggesting that Hinako sees women who expect other women to conform to society as perpetuating the cycle of pain. This could also relate back to the EA system, where a wife's life was dictated by her mother-in-law. It was common for the matriarch of the family to control the daily lives of the wives of the family. Let's see if Hinako has a more positive view of men. Well, that's a little hurtful, but to be honest, I can't really see the lie. Honestly, I can't explain the male monster any better than Hinako does in her journal. The greedily staring eyes, the greasy palms, the way it acts all chummy with me, all of it is completely repulsive. What's more, it never bothers with guys. Typical. This description speaks for itself, but there's more to this monster's design. Its frame is almost completely skinny, except for its giant, bulging belly. This resembles the hungry yokai called gaki in Japanese. Gaki are perpetually starving monsters who are cursed with eternal hunger. They eat and eat, but never get their fill. In the same sense, Hinako seems to paint men as slaves to their own desire. Unfortunately, I've seen some dudes who make me want to agree. But this is actually an interesting thought. As much as Hinako is disgusted with men, she refuses to attribute this to malicious intent, instead representing men as not quite victims, but unwitting participants all the same. To give you another example, let's take a look at one more monster. The last monster we'll look at in this video is the Ara Abare, a name that's tough to translate. The first part, Ara, is an expression, usually feminine, that means "oh no" or "oops" in a very light sort of way. For example, if you realize you just used the last of the eggs, or if one of the kids almost knocks something over, you might start your sentence with "ara." On the other hand, you would not use it, for example, if your husband went on a violent rampage. With that in mind, let's quickly check the rest of the name and ara. That's not good. Yes, Ara Abare is essentially named as a housewife who is excusing the violent actions of her husband. Hinako's journal paints the monster as lost in its rage, matching the theme of male monsters being driven by emotion. Later in this video, we'll go a little bit over the men of the story, but I think this wraps up the gender section nicely, with Hinako showing disgust for both men and women. Men for acting on their basic instincts, and women for perpetuating the cycle of abuse. While Hinako may have strong feelings about oppressive gender roles, that's actually just one outlet of a deeper psychological idea. and that is Hinako's desire for independence and agency. Freedom, not just from expectations based on gender, but the freedom to carve her own destiny is Hinako's most precious treasure. This feeling is perfectly summarized in a diary entry. Once, when solving a maze, her older sister gave her the solution, only for Hinako to realize her joy didn't come from beating the maze, it came from trying to solve the maze herself. This statement is later echoed by Hinako, who directly admits that she'd rather live with the outcome of her own bad choices than a comfortable life made from the decisions of others. So if the central theme of the game is freedom of choice, then let's take a look at what's at stake. Technically, the decision to marry Hinako off to a man named Kotoyuki was a decision made for her, but what Hinako struggles with is whether to accept this decision and how to feel about it. This internal struggle becomes external when we realize throughout the game we're not seeing Hinako journeying to the Dark Shrine and back, but two entirely separate Hinakos on a collision course. On one hand, we have Hinako Shimizu, the young girl who wants to maintain her freedom and independence in life. However, in the other world of the Dark Shrine, we see Hinako without a last name. This is the Hinako who has grown up and moved on in her life, giving up her last name to take the identity of her husband. In fact, these two sides of her personality are actually foreshadowed in her name itself. The name Hinako uses a character for Hina that can mean both baby bird and doll, which mirrors her two sides. One who values her status as a child, whose life is a blank slate of opportunity, and the other side, a doll to be dressed up and put on display for others. The name is also the reason that the two are consistently represented as sparrows within the riddles of the game. Child Hinako is represented as a white sparrow, and the bride Hinako being represented by a black sparrow. And as a quick aside, this is why you see so much sparrow symbolism in the game, with the game starting with a dead sparrow and the game over screen showing the same. Okay, so this is where the section was going to stop, but then this Silent Hill effer came out and I had to quickly read through it. And during the scene where Hinako fights the demon version of Sakuko, I realized something. Something about Sakuko's character arc always bothered me. If you've noticed, I've only been showing her in 2 scenes, and that's because she immediately dies in the opening sequence of the game. Then we fight her, and then we abandon her again? It didn't really make sense to me. It also confused me why we fought Sakuko, abandoned our friends, and then fought Rinko. This is a really bizarre structure for a story, unless there's a specific reason behind it, and I think I have it. So let's take a look at Hinako's journey. She has to let go of her friends, then transform herself. A pretty direct metaphor for Hinako having to leave her life and childhood world behind to get married. With that in mind, we have a friend on either side of this transformation. Before Hinako becomes a bride, we fight Sakuko, and after, we fight Rinko. And it turns out, these girls perfectly represent both the child and bride sides of Hinako. Sakuko is scared of the dark and makes Hinako promise she'll never leave her. This is why she half-jokingly refers to Hinako as a traitor after finding out about her arranged marriage. It's also reflected in her name, which means blooming child, which, yeah, makes sense, but it's also kind of messed up considering what happens to her. On the other hand, Rinko is all too ready to make herself change for Shu, as exemplified here when she offers to play Space Wars in a way that makes me feel strangely uncomfortable. And Rinko's name? Well, Ko still means child, but Rin is an infuriatingly difficult word to translate. But what it roughly means is a cold, dignified grace. And yeah, I guess that's one word to describe what we're seeing here. Another interesting thought is that each girl has a problem with one of Hinako's options for men. Childlike Sakuko is jealous of Kotoyuki stealing Hinako away, while the more mature Rinko wants Hinako to leave her alone with Shu. But this is what finally got the Dark Shrine story structure to click for me. We're seeing Hinako struggle against her friends in a way that represents her internal conflict. And let me be clear, I'm not suggesting anything wild like Sakuko and Rinko don't exist. I think their inclusion in the game was primarily world building. We needed to give Hinako emotional connections to the real world. But the reason they were given these personalities specifically was almost certainly to mirror the central question of the game. Okay, now that I've said my piece, let me try to return you safely to the past me. Oh shoot, that was too far back. 1 second. Ooh, that was too far ahead. Sorry. Okay, I got it now. The conflict between the two Hinakos ends up being the main struggle of the game, the battle being symbolic of her inner struggle to either stay free or submit to her expected role in society. So let's talk a bit about what is expected of her. During the first sequence in the dream world, Hinako is told that she is unfit and must cleanse herself of corruption to become an appropriate bridal offering. In reality, this corruption isn't so much actual corruption as it is her individuality, and cleansing it means erasing everything that makes Hinako, Hinako. This erasure of her identity is demonstrated explicitly in the mid-game, and when I say explicit, boy do I mean it. In some of the hardest to watch scenes in recent gaming, we see the destruction of Hinako's identity in 3 pieces. First, we see Hinako stripped of her agency as she removes her arm. Then, we see her lose her personhood as she gets branded like cattle with another family's crest. Finally, we see her lose her very identity as her face is gruesomely replaced with a mask. So, let's quickly go over these rituals and explain why they're not random torture, but specifically chosen to represent systemic violence against women. First, the arm. It's no surprise that Hinako takes her arranged marriage as an attack on her personal ability to choose a partner. As her hand is figuratively forced in marriage, we see it literally forced in the dream world, as she's given a saw to remove her own arm. So, why the arm? Well, first, it comes from the Japanese phrase ude o yudaneru, meaning to entrust one's arm. It pretty much means what you'd imagine. For example, if a woman entrusts her arm to a man as they walk down the street, she's allowing the man to guide her. It has themes of acceptance and dependence, with the game using Hinako's torn sleeve to highlight the difference. The injuries Hinako experiences in the dream world have real-world counterparts. In the dream world, Hinako replaces her right arm with the massive clawed arm of a werewolf. In the real world, though, it's just her uniform tearing and exposing her right bicep. Now, if you look at her arm, it looks pretty strong for someone of Hinako's size. Now, I couldn't tell you what the average high school girl's bicep looks like, and I don't care to get put on some sort of list by trying to Google it, but I can say that the game makes a clear point to say that Hinako is more physically able than other girls. Showing the muscles in her dominant arm makes an effective visual representation of her ability to fend for herself, instead of holding on to the nearest man. Sorry not sorry, Ringo. But where we might see power, society sees a deviation from the norm. This arm is referred to as a source of corruption that must be lost for the self to be purified. Put in less spooky language, to become a bride, Hinako has to give up her ability to make her own choices. For marriage, Hinako would doom herself to a lifetime of having mazes solved for her, rather than being able to solve them herself. But it gets worse. After the loss of agency, the second attack Hinako suffers is the loss of her personhood. She's treated less like a human and more like a piece of family property, being traded around for her value to men. And what better way to symbolize this than by searing a giant symbol onto her back? If only I could think of another example of people branding something that's supposed to belong to them. If it wasn't clear, the theme is ownership. Hinako is branded with the kamon, or family crest, of her husband. You see these crests throughout the game. Hinako has the school crest on her uniform, and the worship halls of the Dream World segment have sigils that represent Hinako and her friends. Of course, the fox family crest of the kudzu plant is everywhere you look, and this is intentional. Kudzu is one of the world's most aggressive plants, not only growing up to 30 centimeters per day, but also creating a mat of leaves and vines so thick that it blocks other plants from getting sunlight. This is a fitting symbol for the family that Hinako sees as trying to crowd out her freedom. Kudzu was actually introduced to the US from Japan, where it did pretty much the exact same thing, so this is one reference that American players might have understood as well. But this goes beyond simply being marked. Combined with her lack of personal agency, this branding puts Hinako at the same level as an object. In the ending of the game where Bride Hinako wins the metaphorical argument, we see the best case scenario of a Hinako after her wedding. Her two potential love interests, Kotoyuki and Shu, manage to come to an understanding with each other. They enact a cheerful fist bump in the sun after, I kid you not, they agree on ownership rights of Hinako. Ironically, they agree that they should be friends because they're the only two people in the world who have her best interest at heart. If we're being honest though, her blood family might be even worse. Hinako's father treats her as a means to an end, selling Hinako off to absolve a debt he caused himself. And don't comment just yet on that one, I will get into that. And if you think Hinako's father doesn't care about her feelings, then I'm about to make you look like a fool, because check this out. He says himself that nothing could make Hinako happier than fulfilling her duties as a daughter and woman. Yeah, I guess it turns out he also only acts with Hinako's best interest in mind, like the time when he threw a giant knife at her. While this abuse is bad enough, I think the coldest and most brutally destructive statement is actually hidden in a letter Hinako's mother writes to a friend. She details her fury at Hinako's father for throwing the knife at her. What was he thinking, she says. He could have damaged Hinako's face before her wedding. If putting Hinako's face above her safety isn't the best example of how society turns women into commodities, then I don't know what is. The third and final ritual is where we see Hinako give up her identity completely. This scene was wildly uncomfortable to sit through, as we see Hinako remove her face and replace it with a fox mask. Actually, throughout the game, we see multiple examples of women who have gone through this. Hinako's older sister, Junko, is showed with a mask sewn onto her face as well. During the wedding procession, we see a long line of women with masks sewn onto their faces. It's interesting that the men are just wearing normal masks that sit on their face and can be removed and reset at will. But it's not just the mask, there's something else off about the women, right? It's a common tradition in many places around the world for a woman to take on the last name of her husband after marriage. As I mentioned before, this is why the two versions of Hinako are Hinako Shimizu and then just Hinako. But under the Ie system, marriage is a bit more drastic of a change than what you might be imagining. As Hinako's father, Kanta, says to the married Hinako, "You won't be allowed back here, even if you come alone." This isn't an artistic exaggeration, this mirrors what happens in real life. A wife married to a traditional husband is completely absorbed into his house. She's expected to pay respects to the ancestors of her husband and, after her passing, is to be enshrined with his family, something the game references by saying that, even in death, Hinako must serve the family. Even something as simple as a visit to her birth family had to be permitted by her husband and was still limited to major holidays and events. Too much contact with her previous family could be viewed as a lack of commitment to her new family. Maybe this is why the game uses death so liberally as a metaphor. For a game with so many people dying, there's a notable lack of actually dead people. Characters shrug off death more than Golden Age Superman. Sakuko dies nearly immediately after the story begins, but later, when Hinako hears Sakuko calling to her, she doesn't even give it a second thought. She even fights Sakuko later as a boss fight, but her journal entry only mentions wondering if this is the real Sakuko, not something you would generally wonder if you knew they'd gone to that big silent hill in the sky. Similarly, midway through the game, Hinako has to end Shu's life, which doesn't stop him from coming back in half of the endings. It becomes a bit more clear that death, or killing someone, is a metaphor when we see Rinko tell Shu that Hinako is dead. Rinko says this despite directly interacting with Hinako before and after this statement. It's less a literal death and more a "this person is dead to us" metaphoric type of death. This is justified when we look at the two Hinakos, the representation of her two main desires. As they fight for control, they frequently mention killing the other. Since we're really seeing Hinako trying to come to a decision, for one side to kill the other means to erase the doubts and fears that the other side represents. The idea of death equating to being forgotten explains the appearance of Junko and the other brides. They're shown as desiccated, walking corpses with graying skin. They're not literally corpse brides, they're dead and forgotten to the world. The last, most grotesque example of this is the fog monster, which you'll recall is post-marriage Hinako. Hinako sees herself in the most graphic way possible, being completely faceless with dead, gray skin and in Japanese traditional wedding attire. These rituals and depictions of marriage have been a window into Hinako's mind. With Hinako viewing marriage as self-destruction, it's no wonder she views the decision as a life or death struggle. Next, let's take a look at why things have to be this way. Despite being forced to get married, Hinako is shown having genuine interest in the fox mask. So, why is making peace and moving on not an option? What about the men in this system? Do they have any more of a choice? And if not, then what's the purpose of the system? That's what I plan to tackle in the final section of this essay. And here we are at the top of the structure. As promised, this is where we see the oil and vinegar in the salad dressing start to separate. And what's left is the reality of the matter, or what passes for reality in Silent Hill. In the first ending of the game, we saw Hinako as an unwitting murderer. As her sanity buckles under intense stress and heavy medication, she mistakes real people as terrifying monsters, going on a murder spree. Sounds pretty cool, but really it feels incomplete. What the hell is going on? As we go through the story again, the game reveals that the medicine given to us at the start of the game by our good buddy Shu is really a hallucinogen. We'll touch more on that in a second, but if you go through the game again without taking these pills, the story changes. Without a clouded mind, we're able to see that the game is really about one core dilemma, whether Hinako accepts or rejects the wedding. The second and third endings play out as what happens if one side of that argument manages to kill the other. We see Hinako either marry Kotoyuki and move on from her old life, or reject the arranged marriage, gallivanting with Shu off into the foggy distance. But during these endings, we begin to get hints that our internal struggle is really a proxy battle for two greater beings. Kotoyuki has been under the control of the Fox God, a local deity whose shrines you see all over the place. Shu, on the other hand, becomes the vessel for a divine being much older. This deity also seems to be the one controlling the doll we've seen throughout our journey, popping out to provide advice, although admittedly they could have given us slightly more of a heads up. There's discussion on the internet as to whether the deities truly exist or whether they're just another layer of Hinako's representative views on society, but this video won't get into that level of discussion. For our purposes, it really doesn't matter whether they're real. What matters is what they represent. And to follow that representation cleanly, we start with Hinako's inner split and how that matches the two deities at war. Japanese spiritualism is everywhere in Silent Hill F, from the Hokora where you save your game and make offerings for faith, to the design of the puzzles, to the entire subplot that surfaces by the time you reach the third playthrough. The key to understanding faith in Silent Hill F is to first understand how it works in Japan. The native Shinto faith isn't so much about strict religious doctrine, but about acting in harmony with nature. Instead of a rigid religious identity, faith was more like a spiritually informed set of traditions that helped early people navigate life. Japanese spiritualism has a concept of the 8 million gods. While it's not a literal count, it's a poetic way of expressing the belief that every part of nature, from animals to rivers and even rocks, all have their own spirit. Simply put, there's divine energy in every object. There's an actual concept in Japanese folklore that says that this divinity in objects grows stronger with age. That's where we come across the Tsukumogami faith, the older of the two main beliefs in Ebisugaoka. In folklore, a Tsukumogami is an everyday object that turns into a god after 100 years of use. You may have seen some of the popular Tsukumogami, which are confusingly ordinary yokai, such as a walking umbrella or a sentient lantern. Since Tsukumogami is a bit of a mouthful in English, I'm going to refer to the concept as ancient divinity. The faith of ancient divinity puts importance on remembrance and on objects gaining power through continued existence. Doesn't that perfectly match the feelings of the side of Hinako that wants her life to stay the same? Just like the concept of ancient divinity, Hinako places significant importance on how things have always been. There's a reason why Hinako's doll keeps popping up to resist the fox spirit. It's not a part of her subconscious, it's the ancient rival deity of the fox spirit. It uses the power over the oldest object Hinako has, the doll she's confided in since childhood. It also contextualizes the final boss in the ending where Hinako chooses to move on with her life. We find ourselves fighting an Ashura, or warrior demon, but it's made up of seemingly old, well-used objects. Tsukumogami, or ancient divinity, represents or at least mirrors Hinako's desires to stay the same, and that's why bride Hinako has to defeat it before moving on and getting married. Speaking of which, let's talk about the being that's supporting the bridal side of Hinako. The Inari faith, or fox worship, is a double-layered piece of Japanese culture. Foxes preyed on the pests that threatened rice crops, and many saw foxes as a good omen. Eventually, this turned into foxes being seen as messengers for Inari, the god of rice, harvest, and wealth. However, in some areas, these sneaky little guys that only appeared at dusk or dawn looked a bit shifty to people. They became a scapegoat for strange behavior. Was someone acting a bit strange or unusual? Must be a fox possession. Is it raining during sunny weather? Well, that's because a fox is getting married today. These two different impressions people had of foxes, both as a symbol of good luck and as a maestro of mischief, intermingled to form a generally positive but still fickle presence. And it's immediately obvious that Kotoyuki, the fox mask, is representative of the fox faith. We see him protect Hinako time and time again, but he's intentionally written to look duplicitous. Despite his apparent kindness, we can see something more complex lurking beneath the surface. A major hint to the nature of this character is in his ability to banish evil. The fox mask exorcises the demon Miko, and during the marriage ending, he also banishes the child version of Hinako, who plagues her with doubt. He also oversees the 3 ritual mutilations, which are phrased as rituals to cleanse corruption. This demonstrates the fox mask's core role of cleansing corruption. While not directly tied to cultic fox worship specifically, the idea of corruption and purification are central themes of Shintoism. If there is a spirit in each thing that grows powerful with age, then cleansing is necessary if corruption begins to form. But the key here is that it's imbalance, not moral filth. Cleansing should really mean restoration of this balance, but when taken to an extreme, cleansing crosses the line from cleaning the mind to brainwashing, or from purification to intolerance of the unique. That extreme version is what we see in the game. Inari cleansing is not a gentle process. As demonstrated by the ordeals Hinako has to go through, this is purification through sacrifice and conformity. Hinako doesn't lose her arm because it's inherently bad. She has to give it up because it's not what's expected. So now we have a matching layer of conflict. Just as Hinako has an internal struggle between glorifying the past and transforming for the future, there's an ideological conflict over the same principles. This is why the difference between rejecting and accepting the marriage ultimately comes down to your actions with a specific ancient artifact. The sacred sword is a relic of a clan with a millennium-long grudge that grew powerful over time. Is your choice to hold on to the past or to cleanse it of its identity in order to move forward? And it's worth noting that cleansing the sword literally turns it into a worse version of itself, turning an immortal weapon into a normal item. With the inner and ideological mirror in place, we can now step outward into how Ebisugaoka's faiths took these shapes. The history of Ebisugaoka has roots in actual Japanese folklore. In the real world, there's an 8th century chronicle of myths called the Nihon Shoki, or Chronicle of Japan. It contains a myriad of creation myths, and one such myth details an 8-headed dragon called Yamato no Orochi. This dragon was being a bit of a jerk and, note this part down, requiring sacrifices of young women. This was somehow wildly unpopular with the townsfolk, so a god who happened to be wandering nearby got him drunk and cut off each of his 8 heads. Now, everything so far has been real-world mythology. Just like the Taira clan referenced in the game was an actual historical clan that had a bit of a rivalry that ended with their crushing defeat. Their rivals, the Minamoto clan, established the first shogunate in 1892. The Taira clan was largely wiped out, with the remnants scattering to areas that include modern-day Kanazawa, which Ebisugaoka is based on. Again, actual history. However, this is where we get into the game's fictional history. Remnants of the Taira clan, desperate for a good hiding place, saddled up in a mountainous area surrounded by poisonous springs. They figured this would prevent any hostile forces from coming a knockin'. This worked, except their descendants had to deal with the completely unforeseeable problem of springs spewing poisonous vapor. These poisonous springs seem to be an actual phenomenon in the world of the game, and several cases of toxic eruptions have been recorded throughout history. What's less factual is the local legend that developed. A myth started that the poison water was caused by one of Yamata no Orochi's 8 heads landing in prehistoric Ebisugaoka, a belief that nobody else in Japan shared. While it was common back in the day for towns to come up with unique lore, the game draws attention to the idea that this was an explanation drawn up out of necessity. In reaction to this deadly natural phenomena, a primitive cult focusing on idol worship of the dragon head began to form. It wasn't well developed, just a loose set of superstitions meant to appease the dragon god and get him to refrain from poisoning everyone in the area. Then one day, an absolute unit of a monk shows up and says, "Hey, you don't need to keep praying to the dead head of a jerk dragon. Just respect the spirit that lives in this ancient tree over here, and he'll take care of you." And this actually turned out pretty well for the townsfolk. The tree had taught them that there's sacred energy in everything. The longer things exist, the more sacred energy they accrue. And that's actually what made the tree divine in the first place. It itself wasn't unique, but its old age allowed it to be the strongest concentration of divine energy in the area. Unfortunately, centuries later, disaster struck and lightning destroyed the tree. This is where something weird happens. See, people had mostly forgotten about the poison springs in the area by now. So, rather than saying, "What do we need to worship to keep us safe?" they said, "Well, if older things have the most divine energy, what's the next oldest thing in the area?" And then they realized that the object next in line was a statue of Inari, the fox god. And so they changed their object of worship for a second time. Now they focused on Inari worship, with hints of the previous tree worship mixed in. This is why modern-day Ebisugaoka is absolutely littered with fox statues and shrines. It's the most recent shape of a folk religion that began centuries ago. With the history taken care of, let's take a look at what this evolution is saying about belief and habit. So now that you have the background, let me explain why I'm confident in my reading of religion in the game. It's less important that the divine beings being worshipped here are real. What the game is really saying is that these beliefs were originally used as tools of survival and adapted to the world around them. What started as an explanation for natural phenomenon turned into tree worship, then fox religion, with the original reasons being lost to time. An in-game document written by a bitter Billy sums it up. These pathetic people believe their faith has 1,000 years of history, yet it's been mutilated time and time again to suit their petty needs. Man truly is a fickle beast. This might remind you of a not actually real monkey study. In this thought experiment, scientists put a group of monkeys in a cage. There's a ladder leading to a banana, but anytime a monkey tries to climb the ladder, the scientists hose the monkeys down with water. This is because scientists are deeply unhappy people. After time, the monkeys don't even bother trying to climb the ladder. That is, until the scientists rotate a new monkey into the enclosure. This monkey, not knowing better, goes for the banana. The other monkeys, remembering getting sprayed, stop the new monkey from taking the banana. The scientists don't even need to turn on the hose. The scientists repeat the process of introducing new monkeys while removing the old monkeys from the cage. Eventually, no monkey goes for the banana and none of them know why. They only know it's forbidden. And that's a pretty good analogy for what's happening here. Apart from whether the supernatural aspect is real, the people following traditions understand what they're doing, but they don't truly grasp why. And I think this is a fitting analogy because the point is that there was an original intent here. The poison springs are a real danger, and effective or not, it makes sense that people developed a religion to prevent harm. The problem comes when we look at modern society and ask if tradition is still a good way of managing things. Sure, gender roles may have made sense when might was right, but what value does that still have in post-war Japan? A bit ago, I told you to make a note of the original crime of Yamata no Orochi, the 8-headed dragon. Quiz time, punks. Do you remember what it did? That's right, it took people's daughters as sacrifice. Want to know something freaky? That's exactly what the fox cult of Inari does. They have an incredibly freakish ritual where they have to soak a woman in wine and have her blood mixed in, and they do this every 8 years to maintain their power. So, from daughter sacrifice to daughter sacrifice, it looks like nothing changed except for who we give our daughters to. This is something that the game only touches on a bit, but there's a clear suggestion that only a few people on top benefit from how things are. Kotoyuki's family, the Tsuneki family, is said to benefit only from others' misfortune. And remember the guy who criticized the religion of the town? It turns out he was so bitter because his dad mysteriously died after threatening to expose the tax fraud of the village elite. And it seems there's an entire history of mysterious deaths in town that the police don't even investigate. The earliest one was a mass murder of over a dozen people in 1871. It sounds pretty spooky at first glance, but what's strange is that the document then shifts tone and explains that a dam was built after this. This might sound random until you learn that building a dam has traditionally been a highly political action in Japan. Why? Voters liked it because it created jobs, and politicians liked it because the complex financing was a good cover for political kickbacks. The only people who didn't like it were locals who were displaced due to the dam itself. Now, what's more likely? That a giant monk killed a bunch of townsfolk, then was devoured by foxes, or that the game put these two pieces of information next to each other to imply a cover-up. Like I said before, there's no evil mastermind that we end up exposing, but I will say that there's a blink and you miss it throwaway line that gives us a major hint here. If you decide to rebel against your arranged marriage, you're forced to fight the seven-tailed fox, the guiding force of the fox family. And after you win, Kotoyuki, the man you're supposed to marry, apologizes and says that he'll take care of things. He mentions that the fox hasn't had so much to drink since the last wedding, which is a really strange thing to say about a fox god that hasn't shown a hint of intoxication. But it would be sort of a normal thing to say about an elderly patriarch of a family who's drunk and furious at a young bride who refuses to marry his grandson. If we're looking at the climax of the game as a metaphor, and we definitely should be, this is a clear implication as to the true nature of the fox. As I mentioned, the Fox clan seems to be the only group that benefits from this system. While our story mainly follows Hinako's struggle against tradition, we don't see any evidence that anyone else is benefiting from things as they are. Sakuko, daughter of a religious family, wanted to be a head priest but was relegated to the ritual assistant position of Miko, or shrine maiden. Rinko was born into privilege and assumed that others were beneath her, putting up a facade of kindness when really helping others gave her a feeling of superiority. Only later, she realized that she spent so much time looking down on people that she never grew as a person. Even Kotoyuki, Hinako's husband-to-be, is a victim of this pressure. Despite originally giving some serious groomer vibes, it turns out that the fox spirit has been manipulating him since he was a child to be obsessed with Hinako. The fox spirit possessing him demands that he become the perfect suitor for Hinako, whose blood the Fox clan sees as special. Immediately after being freed from the Fox's influence, he does a 180, respecting Hinako's concerns over marriage. He even says that he needs space to make sure his feelings are real and not the cause of some spell. Not exactly supervillain material. And with that, it's time to finally talk about Shi, whose actions were a difficult pill to swallow, no pun intended. At first, Shi seems to be a good friend to Hinako. He mentions that he'll be okay with Hinako's decision as long as it's her decision. As her childhood friend, he should understand how important the freedom of self-determination is to Hinako. The problem is, he tries to enhance her ability to make a determination. The headache medicine he provides Hinako with is a psychoactive hallucinogenic. He gives this to Hinako without sharing the true nature of the medicine, believing its effects will help Hinako to understand her true feelings. Obviously, drugging your friend under the guise of care is an objectively terrible thing to do. It's really control disguised as care. He's saying that he knows what's best for Hinako, all the while taking away her choice to say no. Despite his intentions, he aims to control Hinako just like others do. Notice that this is a mirror to the Fox Mask, who coerces Hinako with a ritual drink. Only with Shu, it's a drug. Shu does eventually realize the error of his ways, and Hinako forgives him. Shu's eventual change of heart supports my interpretation here, but I'd still be lying if I said he didn't get off easy. Speaking of getting off too easy, even Hinako's father, to an extent, has a degree of contextualization here. We learn that her father was robbed of his entire life savings by his best friend and business partner. Then, things got worse when his wife was diagnosed with cancer. Entering bankruptcy for the medical treatment, he's unable to keep his finances afloat and resorts to selling Hinako to a man who's able to solve the family debt. This doesn't make up for the abuse by any means, and Hinako is rightly still unable to forgive him by the end of the story. But there's something sadly ironic that her father's definition of maintaining his lineage is selling his daughter to pay for his wife's treatment. And although it may be too little too late, the fact that he realizes his mistakes and begs for forgiveness is significant in showing how circumstance can make the monster. This is key here. The depiction of male characters not as completely selfish, but as unwitting participants of a broken system. The game's not excusing toxic masculinity, it's criticizing how tradition can enable and cause it. It's a delicate touch, but I think it's crucial to the point of the game. If we attempt to blame the individual for the problems of the system, then really, we're turning a blind eye to the root of the problem. The lateral to hold individuals accountable for their actions, while understanding why they did it, is important. It lets us demonstrate why it's in everyone's best interest to break free of the system, which brings us back to Hinako's choice. A personal decision framed by faith, history, and a system that must be broken for anyone to breathe. And as a parting note, I think the reason Hinako's blood is considered special is that she acts as the catalyst for change. As a young woman with a strong will to resist the system, she represents the first of a new generation. 100 years earlier, Hinako's struggle would have been largely irrelevant, but in this modern world, why should Hinako's value amount to wiping out the financial debt of her father? The world has been conditioned to one way of life for so long, it doesn't realize that it's free to climb the ladder and take the banana. Silent Hill F relocates the franchise to 1960s rural Japan to discuss an issue much closer to home. The game is less about gender and more about how to express your personal identity in the face of societal expectations. It makes sense for this story to come from the subconscious of a collectivist culture, especially when you consider that gender still plays into roles of modern-day Japan. Ryukishio 7 builds the plot like a vinaigrette that separates over replays, revealing two Hinakos whose split mirrors a larger discussion on agency. The arranged marriage functions as the first domino into a long series of issues that the community had propped up for a long time. Everyone in Ebisugaoka struggles with tradition in their own ways. These traditions once served Ebisugaoka as a way to ensure survival, but over time they hardened into stubborn habit. There's an older ancient divinity that values conservation, no matter how problematic. And then there's the fox cult that advocates for extreme cleansing and conformity. This conflict is the highest level mirror of child Hinako's wish to hold on to the past and bride Hinako's push to change herself and move on. Hinako's inner conflict is shown as being stoked by these two deities. The fox god possesses Kotoyuki with a mad intent to marry Hinako, and while we think the doll is originally a force of good, it turns out it's really just the ancient god, using Hinako as a tool to resist the fox god. At the end, free of the petty god's influences, the final question of the game is just, what if we didn't make ourselves do that? We see evidence of every character in the game causing grief to themselves or others by trying to cram themselves into a specific role in society. And without fail, their salvation doesn't come from just treating women better, as people might expect. It comes from them recognizing their narrow worldview has been the sole cause of their problems, And this is why people get tripped up by the messaging. Yes, it's an unapologetically female-centric game, but more than that, it's a human game. And with all of the games that explore topics of masculinity, fatherhood, and generational trauma, I think there's beauty in having a game that relates to a feminine perspective while still being relatable to the male audience. So I want to express my heartfelt thanks to the folks at Konami, and especially to Ryukishio7, for sharing the beauty in the horror of Silent Hill F. And if I've earned your view this far into the video, then I also want to thank you as well, as it means a lot to me. Give this video a like and subscribe if it feels right, and maybe even share your thoughts down below. And until next time, just remember, the actress for Hinako also has a lead pipe, and I think that's pretty cool.